LB and today I'm going to be cooking a passion fruit and coconut cake. It's very simple. The ingredients are going to be online written down, but I'm just going to explain it here now. As I said, it's a very simple recipe. So there'll be a link to the recipe on the Instagram page, and then we've got 125 grams of butter melted, a third of a cup of honey, 1 cup of milk, 2 eggs lightly beaten, 2 cups of self-raising flour, a third of a cup of caster sugar, half a cup of coconut, preferably desiccated coconut, and 2 passion fruit halved. And then as our utensils, we've got 1 whisk, 1 spatula, and baking paper, and a nicely buttered or oiled baking dish for our cake to go in. To begin with, we're just gonna put our butter, melted butter, into our bowl. And we're going to combine it with our honey. Now, a little bit of a cooking hack, I'll see if this works. I put some olive oil inside the bowl so that then when you tip the honey out, it should just nicely slide out of the ramekin. Oh yeah, perfect. Because sometimes we can lose a lot of our honey in our ramekin, but having a little bit of oil in there means that most of it can come out. So with our butter and our honey in our bowl, we're just going to lightly whisk that together until it's nice and combined. It might not look like it's super combined, but you just whisk it around for a bit. It will slowly start incorporating together. And so you'll end up having a nice butter and honey mix. With this recipe, you want to try and have melted the butter a bit earlier than preparing all the other ingredients, just because later on when we add the eggs and the milk, if your butter is super hot and then the milk and the eggs are really cold, there is a bit of a risk of curdling going on. So if you can avoid it, just try and melt your butter a bit earlier and get your milk and eggs out a bit before you start cooking. But there we are, we've got our butter and our honey all combined nicely. Next up, we're basically just adding the rest of the ingredients. So I like to go with the milk first, a cup of milk. If you did need to be lactose intolerant, I haven't ever done it before, but you could potentially add some oat milk or almond milk in there. Then we'll add our 2 eggs, which have already been nicely, lightly beaten. And then we're just gonna add our 2 cups of self-raising flour, our half a cup of coconut, and our third of a cup of caster sugar, and our lovely passion fruits. I'm not sure about the rest of Australia, but in WA at the moment, the passion fruits are delicious. They could potentially be top of the season. So if passion fruits aren't in season where you're currently living, you can always just buy passion fruit pulp in a jar at the supermarket, which equally does the job, but we all know that some fresh passion fruit will probably be a bit nicer. So we'll add in our 2 whole passion fruits, and then that's all of our ingredients in the bowl, and we just have to mix it all together. We don't want to over mix those, so we're just going to lightly mix all of these. Sorry, 1 more passion fruit. These are huge. Sorry, I should have mentioned earlier, I'll put this on our instructions so we know. The oven can be set at 160 degrees fan force or 180 degrees non-fan force, conventional. Okay, so everything is in the bowl. Just gonna get my whisk, lightly whisk it together, just until everything's incorporated. As I said earlier, don't be too worried if there's a bit of curdling and if it looks like there's a few lumps and bumps along the way. It actually ends up delicious. Great, just until it's just mixed. And yeah, it's a good idea to have already beaten your eggs, because if you haven't beaten them already, sometimes the egg yolk is still remaining. So we're just going, as you can see, until, make sure you scrape the bottom of the bowl so everything's there. And that looks nicely mixed, perfect. So I'm just then gonna grab my springform tin. You can basically use any kind of tin. You can use a square Lamington style tin. It doesn't have to be springform. This was just the one that we had at home. I'm gonna put my baking paper in the bottom. And then just, with the spatula, we put our cake in, and we're all ready to go. As I said, very simple. You don't need any beaters, you don't need any fancy equipment. No Thermomix required, just one bowl and one baking dish. Perfect. Now this is gonna go in the oven for 20 to 25 minutes. Just check on it, as I said, at 160 degrees fan force. We'll be back in a bit. While the cake's cooking, we can definitely get on to making the icing of the cake. To begin with, we can have 1.5 cups of icing sugar already pre-sifted into the bowl. Very important to sift icing sugar because there can be heaps of lumps in it. Then we've got 25 grams of softened butter. Try not to make any of it melted. I've probably gone a bit too far here, but we definitely want it just softened. And once again, another 2 passion fruits halved. I also just add a bit of cream cheese to my icing to make it a bit of a hybrid between an icing sugar icing and a cream cheese style icing, but that's completely optional. It's also a bit of choose your own adventure for the icing. You can make a completely cream cheese icing, it's delicious with that, or you can just stick to the traditional icing sugar icing. And then I've also just toasted a bit of shredded coconut for the top, just as a bit of an extra feature. But once again, you don't need to do that. You probably don't even need the icing if you really want to keep it super simple, but it's a very simple icing. All we're gonna do is just add our softened butter to our big bowl with the icing sugar. Looks a bit dry, but then that's when we add in our passion fruit. So our passion fruit basically acts like the wet ingredient of the icing to make it an icing consistency. So depending on how big and juicy your passion fruit are, you might not actually need to use all of the passion fruit. So I'm just gonna add 2 of them to begin with and see how much liquid that is, and mix this around. At the same time, you sort of wanna soften the butter and sort of, incorporate the icing sugar into the butter and the passion fruit mix. So this is looking a bit dry, so I will add a few more passion fruits in here. And if you end up, if your passion fruits are super small and you don't even, it's still a bit dry, you can always just add a tiny bit of water. Okay, I'll add that, see how this goes. Incorporating this in. Once again, you don't need any beaters or anything. It's just fine doing this with a simple spoon. Great. Also, because I did decide to add my cream cheese, I might add that one now because that's gonna also add a bit of a liquid to the icing. Yep, that might be enough. As I said, just a few spoonfuls, or you can go completely nuts and have a whole cream cheese icing. Now, you know what? I'm gonna go 1 other half of the passion fruit. I think that's gonna be perfect. Great. And if you actually go a bit overboard and you put in too much liquid, it's all right. You can just put in a bit more icing sugar. That's the art of making an icing. If it's a bit too dry, we add a bit more liquid, a bit more passion fruit, and if it gets a bit too wet, just add a bit more icing sugar. Perfect. There we've got it, our icing for our cake. I'll be back in a moment when we put the icing on our delicious cake. Okay, our cake is out of the oven and all cooked. I've cooled it slightly. My cake actually ended up taking around 40 minutes. I think it's because I had quite a small springform tin. So if you've got something bigger, it might take 20 to 25 minutes. But if you have got a bit of a smaller tin, then that doesn't matter. You just need to keep checking on your cake, put a bit of a skewer in, and once it comes out clean, it means the cake's done. So my cake's been cooling for a bit. I put my icing in the fridge just while the cake was still cooking so that it wouldn't get too runny. And here it is. So we're just going to flip out our cake firstly onto a random plate, which you won't use. And then take it off here. And then our nice fancy plate we can put underneath and sandwiching our cake. 1, 2, 3, flip. And here we've got it, our lovely cake. And it's just as simple as putting our icing on. This one's still a bit warm, so the icing might slowly start to melt, but it's time to eat now, so I'm gonna put the icing on. Perfect. And you can use a nice spatula or just a simple knife to slowly curve it out. If also you've only got 2 small baking tins, you can even have split the cake into 2 different tins, and then you could even have put the icing into the center of the cake, and then you've got a nice double layered passion fruit coconut cake. There we are, there's our icing, and last minute sprinkle of our toasted coconut on top. And great, there it is. Passion fruit coconut cake, super easy, super simple. Yeah, hopefully you enjoy. Let me know if you cook the cake. And yeah, excited to see everyone's creations. Thank you very much for tuning in. Thanks.